Whenever you find yourself feeling angry or agitated, sad, anxious, depressed, or simply dissatisfied, take notice of the thoughts which accompany the feeling. Notice there is some particular thought or thought pattern which is giving rise to this feeling. Notice that whenever there is suffering of any kind, there is always some thought giving rise to it. And the assumption we make is that the thought is true. We don't question it. We don't challenge it. We don't examine it. We just assume that it's a statement of fact. But if we don't make that assumption, if we just see the thought as a thought rather than a fact, it's like someone telling us something, and maybe what they're saying is true, but maybe it isn't. But we don't go through life believing every single thing we hear. We don't assume that everything people tell us is true. We know that sometimes people lie. We also know that even when someone's intentions are good, they can still be mistaken. Even if someone is trying to help us, they could be misinterpreting the situation, or they don't have enough information, or they have the wrong information. Or perhaps they're making some assumption, or any number of things. And if we're wise, we don't just accept what they say without some kind of verification. But when it comes to our own thoughts, do we ever take time to verify what they're telling us? Do we ever question them? Do we ever consider the possibility that what our thoughts are telling us isn't always true? One of the things that I've noticed, if I just sit and quietly observe my thoughts, particularly those thoughts which are giving rise to suffering, oftentimes those thoughts consist of judgments and opinions and assumptions. Even when there is some factual information, that fact is accompanied by a judgment. And judgments are not facts. Opinions are not facts. And as far as assumptions go, what I assume may turn out to be true, but it's not certain. And if I look at previous assumptions that I've made in the past, how many times did I assume something only to find out that I was wrong? So the problem isn't so much that some thought arises in the mind, some negative thought, whatever it happens to be. The problem is that we assume that it's true. And from that assumption comes the reaction in the form of sadness or anger or anxiety or whatever the feeling happens to be in that moment. So can we take a bit of time to just examine these thoughts that arise and to question their validity, starting with the question, is this true? Is this a fact? Am I certain? Is it possible I might be misinterpreting something? Or maybe I don't have all of the facts. Or maybe this is just an opinion, a matter of perspective. And maybe I need to try and look at it from a different angle. And sometimes you have to go very deep because what shows up at the surface might be part of some bigger underlying story. It could be that the primary thought is in regard to something factual, something which is undeniable. But just beneath that is some judgment or belief which may not be factual. So, for example, the surface thought might be, I don't have a partner. And you don't have to question whether or not it's true, because it should be obvious. But the question is, why do you feel unhappy about it? And so you explore that question and find that there are other thoughts beneath the surface in regard to that fact. There may be assumptions such as, I'll always be alone, or no one will ever love me. Or there may be judgments such as, I'm not good enough, or I'm not worthy of love, or something along those lines. And it's those underlying thoughts and beliefs that we need to bring up to the surface and that we need to question. We don't need to assume that they're true. We need to take into consideration that they may in fact be false. And sometimes it can take quite a bit of introspection to really get to the root of these things. Sometimes we're dealing with reoccurring thought patterns or unconscious beliefs that need to be revisited again and again. But with patience and practice, we can resolve these things. If you make it a practice, every time you're feeling angry or anxious or unhappy or whatever it happens to be, to just sit with that for a moment and to observe the thoughts that accompany it without assuming them to be true. And each time examining them more deeply, discerning what is factual and what isn't. And after some time, you begin to notice that when these thoughts arise, you don't react to them with the same intensity. Or it may be that the emotional suffering doesn't last as long. Or in some cases, you may find that there's no reaction at all. Instead, the thought is discarded as soon as you recognize it for what it is. This thought that comes up habitually, that you've already taken time to examine and to realize that it isn't true. It may still show up from time to time, but you immediately recognize it and discard it. If you take to this practice, you will notice over time that whatever these feelings are, these emotional disturbances, reactivity, this suffering, it decreases. And it may not cease entirely. It may be that from time to time you still feel upset. And sometimes it's completely reasonable to feel upset. But the intensity and duration tends to decrease. That is, you will tend not to ruminate so much. You'll tend not to hold on to it and to wallow in those feelings. You'll find them much easier to process and release.